transgression, and ambiguity. I believe these two elements are at the heart of folkloric monster design, and that'll be the topic of today's video. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and this is Monster Week, the annual event hosted by Ginny D and Pointy Hat, where the whole Dungeon Tuber community comes together to discuss a shared topic. Prior years had Kraken Week and Dragon Week, and this year it is Fae Week. And because my channel is about tabletop role-playing game design, I thought it would be fitting to discuss how you, as maybe a homebrewer or tabletop role-playing game designer, can go about making folkloric monsters that feel like the Fae. So let's define folkloric creatures as well as what I mean by transgression and ambiguity. Let's hop in. Put simply, a folkloric creature is one that is based on folklore, and I know that sounds kind of cyclical, but what I mean is the lore of the folk are the origins of this creature's story. It's tied intimately to a people and their local stories about the world around them and the taboos that they need to avoid and what dangers lie for them outside of their village. That is the heart of folklore. And this folklore differs from the larger scale belief systems of a culture because they're intimate and localized. You can have, say, a group of people that all fall underneath Christianity, as an example, but each village, each local group has its own particular rituals and beliefs and local stories to explain strange phenomena. That's where folklore really shines, this intimate, personalized narrative about the world around them. And that's where our understanding of the Fae comes from. It comes from the oral history of the people of the UK or places like Iceland and Denmark and Germany to explain the world around them and to teach their children morality tales about what to do and not do. Don't wander off into the forest. Don't go down to the creek alone. Don't disrespect the nature spirits or they will come and take you away. All of these were the personalized narratives of localized people transmitted through stories from often a grandparent down to their grandchildren and so forth, going on for generations. And the stories of the Fae shifted from group to group and from region to region and era to era because they would adapt over time to the people that were telling those stories and the challenges they faced. It made the Fae intimately connected to them as a people. And I think that's very important, because folkloric creatures do not really work outside of the context of the folk that told those stories. That's what they're part of and tied to, and that's what we, as designers of monsters, need to pay attention to. This leads us into that first core element I mentioned at the start of the video, transgression. These stories were used to teach younger generations how to live, what to do and not do, and how to be safe in a world that was dangerous and hard to understand. So when designing these creatures, we need to think about what taboo, what transgression they attempt to punish or enforce, as this will lead us to a lot of its mechanical design and narrative design. Does it warn us of going down to the woods, of forsaking our parents, of eating the wrong berries? What is it that we are trying to communicate through the creature's design? For example, I wrote a creature called the Bootyard Bilker. Now, it's not Fae, but it is folkloric. And the stories about the Bootyard Bilker are about transgressing the dead. If you don't properly inter the dead, or if you practice grave robbing, all of this would incur its wrath. And it might come to your local graveyard and abduct you and pull you into an open grave to suffocate you to death, bury you alive. It is enforcing a taboo that culture holds important, respecting the dead. And I wrote another called the Arizona Tenor, which is sort of like a tuberculosis banshee, and people say that it forms when somebody dies of sickness having been forsaken by their loved ones. And what this is enforcing on the people of the world, what it reflects, is the need to take care of each other when we fall ill. In a world with all sorts of supernatural maladies like in Tales from Elsewhere Clockworld, taking care of each other is important, both when they're alive and when they die. These are taboos that the people hold dear that are then reflected in their culture. And so you can tie a creature's design to those taboos, both in why it fights the players and how it attacks them. The Bootyard Bilker's burying its foes alive is tied to the treatment of the dead. The Arizona Tenor spreads its sickness to those that had forsaken it in life, spreading its misery that it had. These are both tied to the narrative mechanically, reinforcing taboos of the culture. But it's important to not have these taboos be scientific, to be consistent, because folklore is primarily an oral tradition. So let's go into ambiguity and why it's so important for folkloric creatures like the Fae. As the players travel from village to village, they hear stories of some strange creature that lurks in the woods, and in one village they say you have to lead an offering of food out on a stone dais in the woods, while another say leave a pie in your windowsill to keep them at bay as they don't like the smell of cooked berries. These disparate stories you could get help flesh out a world and build mystery for the players, and mystery, ambiguity, is what really can make Fae interesting. I am known for saying the phrase, to define is to make mundane, and I think that really applies here to folkloric creatures like the Fae. If it is well established how an individual Fae creature works, like exactly the triggers that would cause them to arrive, exactly how they can be appeased, and all of their vulnerabilities and weaknesses, then there's very little mystery left there. It becomes almost rote for how the players interact with them. And when you have players that have read the book, gone through the monster manual maybe once because they're a GM themselves or just because they like to read the books, then they know what to expect when they find information about this Fae, when they're going to fight them. But in reality, stories of folkloric creatures are inconsistent, even within the same community, as people differ about the best ways to identify that creature and to thwart them. That ambiguity can lead to false positives and entice the players to do further investigation. It shouldn't be answered immediately when they find their first clue. Creating that ambiguity is tricky. You do it both from a narrative perspective and from a mechanical perspective, and I'll unpack both really quick. Narratively, when you present the lore of the monster in your book, don't give them the omniscient narrator perspective about how these things really are. Instead, present the theories and stories of the people of the world in relation to that creature. Describe how the people in this region call it this, and the other ones call it that, and some say this is the origin of it, while others say this. Prevent these conflicting and interesting different takes on that creature to reinforce the local nature of these stories. That builds interest in the players and again leaves you room as the GM to surprise them. Because if there isn't one correct interpretation, that means that you also are given the freedom, rules as written, to create your own take on that Fae creature, on this folklore. You can insert your own nuanced take from this other remote village about it and keep the players guessing. Now, ambiguity in mechanical design is a little bit tricky, so the two main ways to do it would be to give a monster stat block variants that you can use within it. So you have a core stat block, and then you have a little table that shows how you could create slight variation between them. But the most important way to do it, the way that's most effective, I think, is called false positives. False positives in mechanical design is where you give multiple creatures similar effects or omens. For example, if you have multiple creatures that can create zombies in your rulebook, then seeing zombies is not necessarily an indication of one over the other, and you can get the people of your world to misidentify which folkloric creature they're dealing with. Going back to the Bootyard Bilker and the Arizona Tenor, these two creatures both can create zombies. They both can cause undeath to happen in an area. And the local people who beseech the players for help because they're being attacked by zombies in the night, may not identify it correctly. And that mystery, again, entices the players to do further investigation. Sort of like the game Phasmophobia, where you're trying to accumulate all the correct clues to identify what you're about to face. By having some creatures share commonality, those false positives can come up and lead to fun surprises. Those sort of designs invite the players to engage more with your world, both because of the transgressive nature of the creature and its ambiguity. These two aspects are telling the players there's more here that we need to look into. What transgression brought about the Bootyard Bilker in this town? Or is it even the Bootyard Bilker? Maybe it's the Arizona Tenor. What nefarious deeds are the local bandits up to? Or is the guy that owns the local sanatorium letting his patients die gruesome deaths from horrible sicknesses? This structure is excellent fodder for storytelling in tabletop role-playing games, all by being intentional about the transgressive nature and ambiguity of folkloric monster design. Because monsters in tabletop role-playing games are more than just a stat block. They're more than just a series of numbers, like attack and damage numbers and saving throws. They're a chance to immerse the players in a world. And it's the first thing I flip to when I open up a new tabletop role-playing game. Is I like to go look at the monsters and see what they've designed, as that's how I experience a world, is through these interesting foes. But if all that's being presented is a simple stat block with maybe a charm person feature for a fae monster, well, that's not all that immersive. What stories are these fae from? Because that's really what separates folkloric monsters from others, their basis in folklore. And we, as designers of homebrewed monsters or full tabletop role-playing games, can't forget that when we design our own fae folkloric creatures. Keep them grounded in folklore. Well, I hope you found that interesting. If any of the information about my game intrigues you, we'll have links down below to more information about that. Now, I'm participating in Crit this year, which will be coming in the next month or so, and that is a free online convention where anybody can join and play in games run by folks like me. I'll put links down below to that as well. Again, it is a completely free online convention where you can play games and just have a lot of fun with some other content creators. So links down below to that. Consider signing up and checking it out. I'll be running some sessions of Tales from Elsewhere with that, but you can play games like ICRPG, Morkborg, and so forth. Anyway, check it all out, and I hope to see you here next time on Tales from Elsewhere.